Grammar Girl here. I'm Mignon Fogarty, your friendly guide to the English language. We talk about writing, history, rules, and other cool stuff. Today, we'll talk about why the pronoun I seems to take plural verbs and how to make names that end in S possessive. A Grammar Girl follower named Erin Hines asked, why do we use plural forms of verbs with the singular subject I? For example, I go to the store. When he talks about singular and plural, he's talking about what grammarians call number. But the assumption that go is a plural form isn't entirely correct. In addition to number, verb forms can also encode tense and person. Here's a quick overview of the concept of grammatical person. The first person singular pronouns are the forms of I, including me, my, mine, and myself. First person plural pronouns are forms of we. We go to the store. Second person pronouns are the forms of you. In present day English, we don't distinguish between singular and plural for second person pronouns, except for the singular form yourself and plural yourselves. You can refer to one person, you get the passenger seat, or many people. Would you please form a line in front of the counter? Third person singular pronouns are the forms of he, she, it, and more recently, they. And third person plural pronouns are also the forms of they. Now, let's look at the verb go and how it can give information about all three of these things: number, tense, and person. In the form goes, the S ending tells us not only that it's in the present tense, but also that its subject is third person singular, he or she, or maybe squiggly. So the answer to why the singular verb goes doesn't agree with the singular subject I is that goes is also third person, while I is first person. They don't match. If goes is the third person singular present tense form, then what form is just go? Well, the short answer is that it's the everything else form for the present tense. Traditional grammar books will often list this same form 5 times for first and second person singular and for first, second, and third person plural. But from a learning perspective, it's easier just to think of go as a form that can take on whatever combination of person and number you need in the present tense, other than third person singular. The technical term for this kind of situation, in which one word form can fill more than one function, is syncretism, and English has a lot of it. In fact, we've already run across a couple of cases of it, such as the second person pronouns, where you can be either singular or plural. In older stages of English, there were different pronouns for second person singular and plural. The second person singular pronouns were forms of thou, and you was used for the plural. But these days, thou isn't used in everyday English, and instead, you serves as both a singular and a plural second person pronoun. In fact, you is even more syncretic than that, because it can act as either a subject or an object. For comparison, the first person singular pronoun is I as a subject and me as an object. Likewise, the first person plural pronoun is we as a subject and us as an object. In older stages of English, ye was the subjective case of the second person plural pronoun, and you was the objective case. The difference shows up clearly in the King James translation of the Bible in John 8:32. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. These days, you does the job of both, and ye is only used by speakers who want to sound like old-timey sailors. So, with this double dose of syncretism, instead of thou, thee, ye, and you, it's all you, 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 you. But we don't say we have 4 second person pronouns and they're all homonyms. We say that we have just one pronoun, you, which can be singular or plural, subjective or objective, as needed. So, how did English end up with so much syncretism? For plural verbs, it's always been that way. Even back in Old English, the present tense for all 3 persons in the plural was the same form. To illustrate with an actual Old English verb, let's take the verb that eventually developed into modern English deem, as in, we deem you worthy of the prize. In Old English, the plural present tense form for all three persons was dameth. By the way, if you look at the transcript for this episode, you'll see that the word ends with a character that looks like a lowercase p, with the vertical part that goes up too far. That character is called thorn and represents the th sound. As Old English developed into Middle English, this a thorn suffix, like the one in Damath, was lost. The rest of the syncretism in present tense forms came later. The next piece to fall into place was the first person singular form. When the plural a thorn suffix was lost, the plural form ended up sounding almost indistinguishable from the first person singular, which was dama. That just leaves the second person singular form, damist. How did damist lose that st suffix? Easy. Once speakers started using the plural you for both singular and plural, it was natural to use the same plural verb forms with it that they'd been always using. The same thing happens today when speakers use they as a singular pronoun. They don't say, does anybody know what they wants to order? They say, does anybody know what they want to order? A web page for a college class on the history of English talks about this development in second person verb forms and says that the poet Alexander Pope objected to using a plural verb form of you when it referred to an individual. According to the webpage, quote, for some time he used the pattern you was, but abandoned it when his contemporaries condemned it as inelegant and vulgar, unquote. These days, of course, grammarians don't consider the go in you go to the store a plural form anymore. It's a second person singular, or depending on your point of view, a default verb form that can perform the function of second person singular. And that's how we ended up with just two verb forms for most present tense English verbs. Why we say things such as, I go to the store on Wednesdays. Thanks to Erin for the interesting question. I'll put the link for that class webpage on the transcript for this episode. It gives an interesting sociolinguistic history of how and why you edged out thou. That segment was written by Neil Whitman, an independent writer and consultant specializing in language and grammar and a member of the Reynoldsburg, Ohio School Board. You can find him by name on Facebook or find him on his blog at literalminded.wordpress.com. It's been a few years since I talked about how to make names that end in S possessive. And with Kamala Harris becoming the Democrats' presumptive nominee for president, and Simone Biles competing in the Olympics, it suddenly became a hot topic. I made a post about it on Threads that, as of this writing, has more than 150,000 views, so I think it's pretty clear that people are interested. Here's the deal. There are two ways to do it, and which one you choose, or like, depends on which style guide you follow. Associated Press style, AP style, is the outlier here. This is the style book used by most journalists and public relations professionals, and they write it with just a lone apostrophe at the end. Harris's campaign, written Harris apostrophe. Yes, even though you pronounce it as though there are two S's, Harris's campaign, there is no final S on the end if you're following AP style. This AP rule is for only proper nouns, though, people's names and places' names, like Kamala Harris's campaign, Simone Biles's medals, and Paris's skyline. If you're using common nouns in AP style, then you add the apostrophe plus an S. So in the class's homework and the hippopotamus's favorite song, you actually put an apostrophe and an S on the end, even though class and hippopotamus end with the letter S. Now, going back to proper nouns, those names like Harris, Biles, and Paris, most other style guides, including the Chicago Manual of Style, put an apostrophe and an S on the end to make them possessive. So in Chicago style, you write about Biles's routine with Biles's spelled Biles apostrophe S. Now, Chicago used to make exceptions for names with two or more syllables that end in an "ease" sound, and nouns or names that end with an unpronounced S. So they were saying that you should write names like Euripides and Descartes with only an apostrophe and no extra S on the end, like in AP style. So you may have heard those rules, but the editors reversed their decision in the 16th edition of the style book. One thing all the style guides do agree on, though, there is one thing, that when you make plural names that end with S possessive, common or proper names, you just add a lone apostrophe. So if you're writing about multiple Bileses, like the whole family, the plural is Biles es. And if you're writing about the excitement of all those Bileses, it's the Bileses excitement, with just a lone apostrophe on the end of Bileses to make it possessive. I've seen a lot of people not understand this, and I even had people argue with me about it in a post I made that went semi-viral on TikTok, which was wild. But this is no wishy-washy, there are different ways to do it thing. The rule is clear. Plural nouns take just a lone apostrophe after the S to become possessive. The candidates' rally schedules, the competitors' combined medals. Candidates and competitors have just a lone apostrophe on the end. One thing I find interesting about this rule in general is that a lot of people were just taught one way in school and don't realize it can be done two different ways. And it's not like most people were taught one way or the other way. It seems pretty split. Another reason people get confused is that style guide recommendations have changed over the years, like with the Chicago Euripides rule, causing even more confusion. For example, a couple of people have told me they learned it without an extra S in Catholic school when they were kids. And I don't know, but I seriously doubt that decades ago the nuns were teaching AP Stylebook rules. Anyway, if you're feeling overwhelmed and are sure you'll never remember which way you're supposed to do it, or you don't want people to think you've gotten it wrong no matter what you write, sometimes there's a simple write around. For example, instead of writing about Harris's campaign and Paris's skyline, you can avoid the possessive altogether and write about the Harris campaign and the Paris skyline. Finally, I have a familect story.
Hi, Grammar Girl. I have a familect story for you. My then toddler daughter mistook the word urinate for marinate, and we've been going upstairs and downstairs to marinate in our split-level house ever since. This is Frank from Maryland, USA.
Thanks, Frank. That's a hoot. If you want to share your familect, a word or phrase your family and only your family uses, you can still call the old voicemail line, but you can now also post a recorded message for me on Threads or send a recorded message as a private message on Instagram and Mastodon. The links to those accounts are in the show notes. And be sure to tell me the story behind your familect because you know that's always the best part. Finally, I'm starting to see back to school sales, which means fall will be here before we know it. If you're an educator, think about incorporating my LinkedIn learning courses into your fall lesson plans. Each course is made up of short videos with transcripts about every major topic you'd want to teach to your students. Commas, hyphens, dashes, commonly confused words, subject-verb agreement. It goes on and on. And the best part is they're often available free through your university and county library. So pick out some of my LinkedIn learning videos and let me do some of the teaching for you this year. Grammar Girl is a quick and dirty tips podcast. Thanks to Morgan Christensen in ads, Holly Hutchings in operations, Brandon Getchus, director of podcasts, Nathan Semes in audio, and Davina Tomlin in marketing, who's excited to be camping in Idaho soon. And I'm Mignon Fogarty, better known as Grammar Girl. That's all. Thanks for listening.